the dumbest way you lost $500? After kids used lunch trays as sleds down the main stairwell, our principal banned using trays for anything except carrying food. The sledding incident had resulted in 3 broken arms and a lawsuit, so now security guards actually monitored tray usage. If you were caught spinning a tray, using it as a fan, or even holding it vertically, you got detention and a fine for misuse of school property. Our school had this outdoor eating area to try to make lunch feel less like prison. It had picnic tables under trees and these big umbrellas that provided shade. What nobody had considered was that we were basically eating in the territory of about 300 seagulls who lived by the dumpsters behind the cafeteria. These weren't cute beach seagulls either. These were massive, aggressive trash birds who'd learned that teenagers meant food. They'd dive bomb kids for french fries, steal entire sandwiches right out of your hands, and crap on anyone who tried to shoo them away. The school's solution was to tell us to eat faster and cover our food with napkins. Like paper would stop a bird that regularly tore through garbage bags. Most of us had learned to eat defensively, hunched over our trays like prisoners, scanning the sky every few seconds. Some kids had started eating inside on the floor rather than risk the outdoor tables. The teachers on lunch duty just stood by the doors, refusing to get involved with what they called natural wildlife behavior. Mr. Garcia actually took photos of the birds attacking students, saying it was interesting urban adaptation. The worst seagull was this massive one we called Terry. He had a messed up foot and absolutely no fear of humans. Terry had once stolen an entire pizza slice from the principal's hand during a school board lunch tour, and instead of addressing the bird problem, they just stopped eating outside. Terry knew which kids were afraid of him and would actually target them specifically, walking right up on the table and staring them down until they abandoned their food. I'd personally watched Terry steal probably $50 worth of my food over 2 years. My mom had started packing extra sandwiches specifically for me to sacrifice to Terry, so I could eat the rest in peace. It was like paying protection money to a mob boss, except the mob boss was a seagull with anger issues. One day I was eating outside with my friend Jade when Terry decided to escalate from theft to violence. Jade had made the mistake of bringing leftover birthday cake in a clear container, and Terry could see it. He landed on our table and started doing this aggressive neck movement that meant he was about to attack. Jade tried to push the cake toward him as an offering, but Terry wasn't interested in negotiations anymore. He went straight for Jade's face, wings spread wide, talons out, screeching like a demon. I'd never seen him actually attack someone's head before, but he was going for her eyes with genuine violence. Jade was screaming and trying to cover her face, but Terry kept diving at her, his talons catching in her hair, his beak pecking at her hands when she tried to protect herself. Without thinking, I grabbed my metal lunch tray and swung it like a shield, blocking Terry's next dive. He slammed into it with this horrible thunk, and the tray bent from the impact. He came at us again, and I held the tray up, using it like riot police use shields. Terry's talons scraped across the metal, leaving actual gouges in the tray as he tried to get around it to Jade's face. I was yelling for help, but the lunch monitors just stood there recording it on their phones. Other kids were backing away, some laughing, some screaming. Terry made one more dive, and I swung the tray hard enough to actually hit him mid-flight. He finally flew off, probably to plot his revenge, leaving Jade with scratches all over her arms and scalp. The nurse said Jade was lucky she didn't lose an eye. Her parents were talking about rabies shots and lawsuits. There were literal blood drops on the warped lunch tray, which now had talon marks scratched across the school logo. I thought I was a hero for about 5 minutes until Principal Moore walked up holding the destroyed tray like evidence at a crime scene. Next morning, my mom got an email with an attached invoice, $500 for destruction of school property, due within 30 days. She called the school thinking it was a mistake, but Principal Moore explained that I'd violated the lunch tray policy by using it as a weapon. I understand there was a bird involved, he said when my mom put him on speaker so I could hear, but the rule is very clear. Lunch trays are for carrying food only. Your daughter weaponized school property. The replacement cost for our custom trays with the school logo is $500. If you can't pay, we can set up a payment plan, but this will go on her disciplinary record either way. My mom was quiet for a long moment, then said in this deadly calm voice that meant someone was about to get destroyed, "Are you seriously charging us $500 because my daughter stopped a bird from blinding another student with a lunch tray?" Principal Moore cleared his throat on the other end of the phone. "Mrs. Henderson, I understand your concern, but we have to think about liability and setting precedent here." His voice had that fake patient tone adults use when they think you're being unreasonable. If we make exceptions for one student, where do we draw the line? Mom didn't say anything for what felt like forever. I watched her knuckles turn white as she gripped the phone. Her jaw was doing that thing where she grinds her teeth when she's trying not to explode. The silence stretched so long that Principal Moore started talking again, filling the space with more excuses about insurance policies and district guidelines. He kept using words like unfortunately and regrettably like that made it better. Mom's free hand was clenched into a fist on the kitchen counter. "I need to see this policy in writing," she finally said, her voice flat and controlled. "And I want documentation showing how you arrived at $500 for a lunch tray." Principal Moore sounded almost happy about this request. "Of course, I'll have my secretary email everything by end of day." He probably thought we were accepting the situation. "We understand this is difficult, but rules exist for a reason." Mom hung up without saying goodbye. She stood there staring at the phone for a second, then turned to me. "We're not paying a single cent until I review every word of their supposed policy." She grabbed a notepad from the drawer and started writing names. "Lisa from my book club is a lawyer, and Jennifer's husband is on the school board." She was writing so hard the pen was tearing through the paper. "If they want to play stupid games, they're about to learn I know how to play them better." The next morning at the school was weird. Everyone already knew what happened because at least 20 kids had filmed Terry attacking Jade. The videos were all over social media by first period. Kids I didn't even know were coming up to me in the hallway asking if it was true that I was getting fined $500 for saving someone from a killer bird. Some thought it was cool that I'd fought off Terry. Others couldn't believe the school was actually charging me for it. By second period, the story had spread through the whole school. People kept showing me their phones with different angles of the attack. One video clearly showed the lunch monitors just standing there filming while Terry went for Jade's face. Another showed Principal Moore walking up afterward with the bent tray like he'd found evidence at a crime scene. Between third and fourth period, I was at my locker when Jade found me. Her head was wrapped in white bandages that made her look like she'd been in a car accident. She had scratches down both arms covered in antibiotic ointment that made them look shiny and gross. "I'm so sorry," she said before I could even say hi. Her eyes were all red like she'd been crying. "My parents are so mad about what happened. They're even madder that you're in trouble for helping me." She kept touching the bandages on her head like they hurt. "My dad wants to sue the school for letting birds attack students. My mom can't believe they're charging you money for protecting me." I told her it wasn't her fault, but she kept apologizing anyway. At lunch, I took my tray inside and sat on the floor near the wall with about 20 other kids who'd given up on the outdoor tables. We looked like refugees from a war zone, all huddled against the walls eating as fast as we could. The security guards watched us from the doorway but didn't say anything. Technically, we weren't breaking any rules since the handbook didn't say you couldn't eat on the floor. It just said you had to eat in designated areas and the hallway by the cafeteria counted. Some freshmen asked why we didn't just eat at the indoor tables. A junior explained that those filled up in the first 2 minutes of lunch, and unless you ran from from class? You were stuck outside with Terry and his gang. After school, I was packing up my stuff in Mr. Garcia's science class when he walked over to my desk. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then pulled out his phone. I can't officially get involved, he said quietly, swiping through his camera roll, but I thought you might want these. He showed me at least 30 photos and 2 videos he'd taken during Terry's attack. One video showed the whole thing from start to finish. You could see Terry diving at Jade's face, me grabbing the tray to block him, and the monitors just standing there doing nothing. Another photo showed the blood on Jade's scalp where Terry's talons had caught her. I've been documenting these attacks for my research on urban wildlife adaptation, he said, still keeping his voice low, but this particular incident seems especially relevant to your situation. I'm curious why Mr. Garcia has been documenting these attacks for research but never seemed to do anything to help students before now. He's got 30 photos and videos of birds attacking kids, but he's only sharing them now that someone's getting fined. What's his real angle here? He airdropped the files to my phone without me even asking. That evening, Mom and I sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and my student handbook. She'd printed out the email from Principal Moore with all the attachments about the tray policy. The section about lunch trays was only 1 paragraph long, but somehow they'd interpreted it to mean basically anything could count as misuse. The language said trays were exclusively for food transport, and any alternative usage would result in disciplinary action and financial restitution. There was nothing about defending yourself, nothing about emergencies, nothing about what to do if a bird was literally attacking someone's face. Mom kept highlighting different sections and making notes in the margins. This is so vague they could charge someone for holding a tray wrong, she muttered. She pulled up the school board website and started looking up contact information. We have a meeting with Assistant Principal Berger tomorrow at 10, she announced, fingers flying across the keyboard as she sent emails. If they want to play bureaucratic games, I spent 5 years working in city planning. I know every trick in the book. The next morning, we walked into the main office right at 10. Claudia Berger was waiting for us in the small conference room, sitting behind a stack of papers like she was prepared for battle. She had this fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Henderson, thank you for coming in, she said in that syrupy voice administrators use when they're about to screw you over. I've reviewed the incident, and while we sympathize with the situation, the policy is quite clear. She pulled out a highlighted copy of the student handbook. Your daughter used school property in a manner inconsistent with its intended purpose. Mom leaned forward in her chair. She used it to prevent another student from being permanently injured by a dangerous animal on the school property. Claudia Berger's smile got even faker. Nevertheless, the policy doesn't allow for exceptions based on circumstances. She shuffled through her papers and pulled out a payment plan form. We can offer you 6 months to pay the $500 if that would be helpful. She slid it across the table like she was doing us this huge favor. Mom's eye twitched in that way that meant someone was about to get destroyed, but she just smiled back and said we'd need time to consider our options. After school, I was heading to my locker when Miles Bonner, the cafeteria manager, stopped me in the hallway. He looked around to make sure nobody was listening, then pulled out his phone and showed me something on the screen. It was a purchase order for lunch trays from their supplier, and the unit cost was $28 each. He raised his eyebrows at me, put his phone away, and walked off without saying anything else. The $500 fine was basically 17 times the actual replacement cost. I stood there doing the math in my head when Jenna Blackburn from the school newspaper walked up with her notebook already out. She asked if she could interview me about what happened with Terry and the tray. Part of me worried that talking to the newspaper would make things worse, but I was mad enough to tell her everything anyway. She took notes while I explained the whole situation, from Terry's attack to the ridiculous fine. That night my phone buzzed with a text from Jade. She'd sent me photos from the emergency room and they were worse than I remembered. Deep scratches covered her scalp where Terry's talons had caught in her hair, and her arms had these long red marks that needed antibiotic cream. Her mom had taken pictures of everything for documentation, and the discharge papers showed they'd spent 4 hours getting her treated. The next morning, I walked into school to find everyone staring at their phones and whispering. Someone had posted the lunch monitor's video of Terry attacking Jade with the caption, "Girl fined $500 for this." The video showed everything clearly. Me swinging the tray to protect Jade while Terry went crazy trying to get at her face. Comments were pouring in, some calling me a hero for protecting my friend, others calling the school insane for the fine. During lunch, I watched security guards actually write up this tiny freshman for holding his tray vertically while walking to the trash can. The kid looked so confused as they explained he was getting detention for improper tray handling. He kept saying he was just trying not to spill his leftover milk, but they wrote him up anyway. The whole cafeteria watched in disbelief as they made him sign the detention slip. I spent my entire study hall period writing a formal appeal letter about the fine. I attached screenshots of the purchase order Miles had shown me, though I didn't mention his name, plus Mr. Garcia's photos of the attack and Jade's injury pictures. Mom came home early to help me edit it, making sure it sounded professional while still explaining how completely ridiculous this whole situation was. We printed out 3 copies with all the attachments. The next day, the guidance counselor pulled me out of English class. She sat me down in her office and suggested that if I wrote an apology letter for misusing school property and agreed to pay the fine, they might reduce it to $300. I told her I wasn't apologizing for protecting my friend from getting her eyes clawed out by a psycho bird. She sighed and said I was making this harder than it needed to be. That evening, Mom sent the appeal email to Principal Moore, but she didn't stop there. She copied the entire school board, the superintendent, and even the district office. In the email, she mentioned that she was consulting with legal counsel about the school's failure to provide a safe eating environment while simultaneously punishing students for protecting themselves. She attached all our evidence plus links to the viral video that now had thousands of views. 2 days later, we got a form response that looked like it was copied and pasted from a template. It said our appeal was under review and would be processed in the order received. The fine remained due within 30 days, and they'd now added a warning about late fees if we didn't pay on time. They were seriously going to charge us extra money on top of the fake inflated fine. At lunch, I tried a new strategy and wore my baseball cap pulled down low like a shield while eating. The monitors immediately came over and threatened to write me up for creating unsafe conditions. According to them, wearing protective gear counted as dangerous behavior because it might encourage other students to do the same. I had to take the hat off or get detention. Meanwhile, Terry and his gang of seagulls continued their reign of terror completely unchecked. 3 days later, I was grabbing napkins from the cafeteria when Miles Bonner, the cafeteria manager, walked past and dropped a folded paper next to my tray. He winked and kept walking before I could say anything. I opened it in the hallway and found a copy of the purchase order for our lunch trays from 2 years ago. The unit price was $28 each, not $500. The paper showed an order for 200 trays at $28 per unit, with the school logo costing an extra $3 per tray. I took a picture with my phone and stuffed the paper in my backpack. That afternoon, Jenna Blackburn from the school newspaper found me after chemistry class and said her article about the tray incident was going live on the school website. She'd interviewed 12 students who saw Terry attack Jade, plus she had screenshots from the videos everyone took. The district sent her this official statement about maintaining consistent disciplinary standards and how student safety was their top priority, which she'd included at the end. By dinner time, the article had been shared on Facebook by parents from our school, And then parents from other schools started commenting with their own stories. Some kid in Ohio got suspended for using a textbook to kill a wasp that was attacking another student. A girl in Texas got fined $200 for using her backpack as a shield when a dog got into their playground. Our situation became this perfect example of how zero-tolerance policies made no sense. The comment section had over 300 replies by the next morning, mostly parents saying the school was insane. I found Jade the next day eating her sandwich in the library bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet lid with her lunch bag balanced on her knees. She said she couldn't deal with the seagulls outside or the kids asking her about the article inside the cafeteria. She kept apologizing for getting me in trouble, saying none of this would have happened if she hadn't brought that stupid cake. I told her it wasn't her fault, but she just shook her head and went back to eating her sad bathroom sandwich. Mom took time off work to attend the school board meeting that Thursday night. She'd printed out copies of the tray policy, the purchase order Miles had given me, and screenshots from the videos of Terry's attack. During the public comment period, she stood at the microphone and read the entire tray policy out loud, emphasizing the part about trays being for food only. Then she described what actually happened, how Terry went for Jade's eyes, how I used the tray as a shield, how the monitors just stood there filming. She held up the purchase order and asked why the school was charging $500 for a $28 tray. Board member Ezra Shelton leaned into his microphone and asked Principal Moore to explain the $500 figure. Moore stood up and started talking about replacement costs and how they had to special order individual trays, and there were administrative processing fees involved. He mentioned shipping costs and handling charges and something about matching the existing tray design. Wow, the cafeteria manager secretly helping by showing those real tray prices is so interesting. How did he know to keep those old purchase orders? Shelton asked for documentation of these costs, and Moore said he'd have to check with the business office. Another board member asked if there was an itemized breakdown available, and Moore said he'd look into it. After the meeting ended, the PTA president walked up to Mom in the parking lot and said she'd been getting calls from angry parents all week. Half were mad about the seagull problem that the school refused to fix, and the other half were mad about me getting fined for protecting another student. She was adding both issues to the next PTA meeting agenda and wanted Mom to speak. The very next day during lunch, this freshman girl named Sadie Walters was eating outside when Terry dove at her table. She tried to run, but Terry followed her, snatching her entire sandwich out of her hand and scratching her fingers with his talons. The monitor stood 20 feet away filming the whole thing on their phones. When Sadie's friend asked why they didn't help, one of them said they couldn't intervene due to liability concerns. Sadie had to go to the nurse for the scratches, and her parents picked her up early. That night, I started typing up a petition on my computer for indoor seating options and basic bird-proofing measures. I wrote about how we needed covered eating areas, or at least some kind of netting to keep the birds away from the tables. I mentioned the health risks and the injuries students were getting. I printed 50 copies and brought them to the school the next morning. By the end of first period, I had 70 signatures. Kids were taking pictures of the petition and sharing it in group chats. During lunch, students were actually lining up to sign it. Some kids wrote comments in the margins about their own bird encounters. One girl drew a picture of Terry with devil horns. By the end of the second day, I had 312 signatures, including some teachers who signed when no one was looking. The secretary in the main office called me down during last period and said Principal Moore wanted to see me. I walked into his office and he had my petition spread out on his desk. He said organizing protests could be considered disrupting the educational environment, which was a suspendable offense. I asked if being attacked by birds while trying to eat lunch was also disruptive to the educational environment. He said that was different because it was a wildlife issue, not a disciplinary matter. I pointed out that students couldn't learn if they were afraid to eat lunch or hiding in bathrooms to avoid birds. He told me to stop circulating the petition immediately or face consequences. I walked out of his office and went straight to the nurse's station where she was typing up her latest report about Sadie's scratches. She looked up when I walked in and motioned for me to close the door behind me. She turned her computer screen toward me and showed me what she was writing about the risk of eye injuries from the seagull attacks, adding photos of Jade's head wounds and Sadie's scratched hands to the official district documentation. She told me she'd been warning them about this for 2 years, but nobody listened until now when parents were getting lawyers involved. The next morning, Jenna's article about the whole mess had gone viral on social media with thousands of shares and angry comments from parents everywhere dealing with similar stupid school policies. A reporter from the local news station called the school office asking for a statement about why students were being fined for protecting each other from dangerous birds. The secretary transferred the call to Principal Moore's office, and suddenly the administration announced they were reviewing the situation and exploring possible solutions to the outdoor dining challenges. Within 2 days, the health department got so many complaints from parents that they scheduled an official inspection of our outdoor eating area. The school sent out an emergency email saying they were already working on improvements and had always prioritized student safety, which made everyone who'd been attacked by birds laugh. Mom got a call that evening from Assistant Principal Claudia Berger, who said they'd reconsidered and were willing to reduce my fine to just $100 if we agreed to drop all complaints and sign a paper saying the matter was resolved satisfactorily. Mom actually laughed out loud on the phone and said we weren't paying a single cent for protecting a student from injury, and then hung up on her. 3 days later, the health inspector showed up during lunch to evaluate the outdoor eating area, and Terry must have sensed fresh meat because he came swooping down from his usual perch. The inspector was taking photos of the uncovered trash cans when Terry landed on his clipboard and started that aggressive neck movement he did before attacking. The inspector tried to wave him away, but Terry went full attack mode, diving at the man's face with his talons extended and wings beating against his head. The inspector dropped his clipboard and ran for the building while Terry chased him, pecking at his bald spot and drawing blood before security finally scared the bird away with a broom. The inspector wrote the most brutal report I've ever seen, documenting unsafe conditions, disease transmission risks from bird droppings on eating surfaces, and actual bodily harm to himself during the inspection. The school board called an emergency meeting 2 nights later, and the room was packed with angry parents including Jade's mom and dad, who brought printed photos of her injuries and copies of their medical bills. Board member Ezra Shelton stood up and made a motion to immediately suspend all tray-related fines while they reviewed the policy, pointing out that punishing students for self-defense was opening the district to massive liability. The motion passed 4-3 with Principal Moore sitting there looking like he'd swallowed a lemon while parents applauded. The next week, the district's lawyer apparently told them they needed to settle with any families who had documented injuries from bird attacks because the lawsuits would cost way more than settlements. Suddenly, student safety became the top priority when it had dollar signs attached to it, and the administration started actually doing something about the bird problem. Principal Moore sent out an announcement about temporary modifications to the lunch area, including new indoor overflow seating in the old music room and some covered eating areas being built outside. He acted like this had been his plan all along, and he'd always been concerned about student welfare, even though we all knew he only cared because lawyers were involved. Within a month, they installed these metal bird spikes on all the umbrellas and built covers over the trash cans so the seagulls couldn't get to the food waste anymore. Terry and his gang of psycho birds had to relocate to the parking lot where they started terrorizing delivery drivers instead of students. students, which became UPS and FEDEX's problem to deal with. The outdoor eating area actually became usable again, with kids able to eat without constantly watching the sky for incoming attacks or sacrificing half their lunch as protection money to violent birds. 3 days later, Claudia Berger called me to her office during second period and handed me a letter with the school district letterhead. She sat there with this fake smile while I read that my fine had been administratively resolved and removed from my record. She kept talking about how the administration had reviewed the situation and decided to show mercy, like she was doing me this huge favor instead of admitting they'd been completely wrong. I just nodded and took the letter while she went on about how I should be grateful for this second chance. The next week, the school board held another meeting, and this time Mom dragged me along to watch them vote on revising the tray policy. The new language included exceptions for emergency defensive use against aggressive wildlife or other immediate threats to student safety. Mom actually stood up during public comment to make sure they added specific wording about protecting yourself and others, not just yourself. Ezra Shelton read the whole revision out loud twice to make sure everyone understood that students wouldn't be punished for using school property to defend themselves anymore. The vote passed 6-1 with only one board member complaining about liability issues. After the meeting, Miles Bonner caught up with me in the parking lot and started laughing about the whole situation. He told me the district had actually approved almost $200,000 in new funding for cafeteria improvements because of all the safety concerns our incident had raised. The money was going toward new covered eating areas, better trash management systems, and even some indoor expansion of the cafeteria. He thought it was hilarious that my $500 fine had turned into the school getting hundreds of thousands for upgrades they'd needed for years. A few weeks later, Jade found me before first period to tell me her parents had finally reached a settlement with the school. The district agreed to cover all her medical bills plus some extra for pain and suffering, and they had to sign something promising to maintain all the new safety measures they'd installed. She stopped apologizing to me every time we talked after that, which was a relief because I was tired of telling her it wasn't her fault. The student council announced they were creating something called a safety committee that would actually have input on policies affecting students. They held elections, and somehow I ended up being nominated and winning as the first student representative. It felt weird being on a committee with teachers and administrators, but at least we could bring up actual problems students faced instead of just being told what the rules were. Moore suddenly calling the whole thing a wildlife issue instead of a discipline problem makes me wonder if someone told him how bad this looked legally. The nurse showing those injury photos like she's building a case, that's someone who knows exactly what she's doing right now. By spring, Terry had completely abandoned the outdoor eating area and set up his new territory in the parking lot near the loading dock. He'd attack delivery drivers now instead of students, diving at anyone who got too close to the dumpsters there. Some of the freshmen didn't even know why everyone called the biggest seagull Terry or why nobody parked in certain spots. They just accepted it as one of those weird school things you don't question. Mr. Garcia pulled me aside after class one day to show me this presentation he'd made about urban wildlife adaptation for some teaching conference. He'd used all his photos and videos from the Terry attacks, including the one of me swinging the tray like a shield. He'd listed me as a research assistant on the title slide and gave me extra credit for the semester without me doing any actual work. He said it was his way of saying thanks for giving him such interesting material to present. The local news station that had covered the original story came back to do a follow-up piece about all the policy changes. They interviewed Principal Moore in front of the new covered eating areas while he talked about listening to student concerns and prioritizing safety. He acted like the whole thing had been his idea to reform the policies and create safer conditions for students. I watched the interview at home with Mom, and we both rolled our eyes when he talked about his commitment to student welfare. Mom had taken the letter rescinding my fine and gotten it framed in this fancy black frame from the craft store. She hung it in the kitchen right next to my honor roll certificate from last year. Every morning when I got breakfast, I'd see it there, and Mom would smile and say it was proof that fighting stupid bureaucracy was possible, even when it felt impossible. She'd tell anyone who came over the whole story while pointing at the framed letter like it was some kind of trophy. At the end of the school year, they held the Student Journalism Awards ceremony in the auditorium. Jenna won first place for her coverage of the whole Terry situation and the policy changes that followed. She got up on stage to accept her award and actually thanked me by name in her speech for being willing to stand up against stupid rules and giving her such a great story to cover. People actually clapped when she mentioned my name, which made my face turn red, but also felt pretty good. The whole thing had started with me losing $500 for protecting my friend and ended with the school spending hundreds of thousands to fix problems they'd ignored for years. The new covered eating area started getting called the Terry shelter after about a week. Kids would point at it and tell freshmen that's where we hide from the murder birds. Even the janitor started using the name when they cleaned it. I heard Mr. Garcia call it that during class once while explaining urban wildlife to his students. Principal Moore walked past a group of kids talking about the Terry shelter and just kept walking like he didn't hear anything. The sign on the building said covered dining pavilion, but nobody ever called it that. A whole year went by and I was helping with freshman orientation the next August. Groups of nervous ninth graders followed us around while we showed them the important stuff like which bathrooms actually had soap. When we got to the parking lot, I pointed at this huge seagull sitting on a dumpster. That's Terry, I told them, and he owns this whole area, so don't leave food in your car. One kid laughed until Terry spread his wings and screeched at us. I explained how Terry used to attack kids for their lunch until someone fought back with a tray. The freshmen looked confused about why that was a big deal. I told them about the old tray policy and how using one as a shield got me a $500 fine. Their eyes got huge when I explained how the whole thing led to the Terry shelter being built. One girl asked if I really hit a bird with a lunch tray, and I said yeah, saved my friend's face from getting shredded. They all looked at me like I was some kind of legend, which felt weird but also kind of cool. Jade and I ate lunch inside every day now in the regular cafeteria where it was safe. Sometimes we'd see Terry through the window terrorizing people in the parking lot. We'd laugh about how a psycho bird basically forced the school to spend thousands of dollars on improvements. She still called me her hero sometimes, which made my face get hot. Her scars had mostly faded, but you could still see faint lines on her arms if you looked close. We never ate outside anymore, even though the Terry shelter was supposedly safe. Other kids used it, but we'd both had enough of outdoor dining for life. Looking back at the whole thing, that $500 fine I never actually paid changed everything. The school spent way more fixing the problem than they ever would have made from my fine. Sometimes the dumbest situations lead to real change, but only if someone's willing to fight the stupidity. Principal Moore never admitted he was wrong, but the new policies spoke for themselves. Now kids could actually eat lunch without combat training, and lunch trays were just for carrying food again, which is all anyone really wanted anyway. Thanks for hanging out and exploring all this with me today. Such a fascinating ride to share with you. Until next time, friends. And hey, subscribe for more content like this.